Right, 15 miles later, safe to say that is problem solved. I mean, I shouldn't really have had to fix this thing in the first place, to be honest with you, but either way, we're back in business. Okay, right, so before we get into the issues with this crankset, because it was a little bit strange, it's worth saying while I spin around on my kitchen stool that, yeah, all the cranksets that I tested in this episode were bought by me with my own cash. Nothing was sent to me for review. So let me give you a bit of context. I like finding ways to drop weight from my bikes without spending too much money. So over the years, I've tried a couple of cheap carbon cranksets from AliExpress. This was one of the first ones I tried, actually. It's from a brand called Racework. Hopefully you can read that there. I used it for a while, but eventually it developed a crack in the carbon right here, where this kind of pinch bolt attaches the non-drive side crank arm onto the axle. And after that, it was basically scrap. Next up was this one from a brand called Velo. Now, the original extraction bolt in the middle there, it did snap on me, so that had to be replaced, which was a little bit annoying. But since then, it's been rock solid. I've used this for thousands of miles, and yeah, still use it to this day. And lastly, this one on my steel road bike. So I've used this for nearly 1,000 miles. Again, it's from that brand Velo, and it's been fantastic. No problems. Although the axle running through the middle, it's a dub standard, so it's a little bit thicker than regular Shimano axles. However, they've all got one thing in common. They use aluminium axles to save weight. Now, that's not a problem on the dub standard crankset down here, but on the other two, they use slightly thinner 24mm Shimano standard axles, and those have been known to snap or shear under heavy load when they're made of aluminium. Now, I've used axles like it for years without any issues, and not just on these two carbon cranksets here, but this one, I've got probably 8,000 miles on this thing. It's got a 24mm aluminium spindle running through there, no issues at all, but it's one of the reasons I'm slightly hesitant to give cranksets like this a full recommendation, because there are reports of spindles like these failing. But that's where this new one that I picked up recently is supposed to come in. So it uses a very similar construction, so nice looking carbon crank arms with a one-piece aluminium chainring, but the axle running through the middle here is made of a titanium alloy. Using titanium means the axle is both stronger and far more fatigue resistant than the same axle made in 7075 aluminium. It's nice and lightweight, but under repeated load cycles, it's far less likely to develop those fatigue cracks that aluminium is prone to, and ultimately it's less likely to just shear off under load. Plus, it's the lightest one that I've tried as well, at just 525 grams. For a bit of reference, a Shimano 105 crankset in the same chainring size and crank arm length came in at 763 grams. So yeah, this thing beats that out quite handily, and it's not that expensive either. I got this delivered to my house for just under 150 quid. So yeah, basically, this crankset, it held a lot of promise for me. It seemed really well made, and I was looking forward to putting it through its paces, but pretty much out of the gate, it was weird. Firstly, the axle is quite wide actually. So I put this thing together and I didn't really notice it at first, but yeah, here it is with a Shimano BSA bottom bracket on the axle. And yeah, there's quite a large gap there that's not going to be taken up by that preload ring. Fortunately, it came with some spacers in the box. So I've used these two. They amount to just under 4mm. But yeah, on all the Shimano standard road cranksets I've tried, I've never had to add more than 1mm worth of spacers. So this was slightly unusual. So I put the larger, roughly 3mm spacer on the non-drive side, and then that smaller shim on the other side next to the chain rings. Now you could argue that A, that's going to widen my Q factor on the bike, and B, because the load, especially on the non-drive side, is applied slightly further outboard, it's going to put a bit more stress on the bearings inside the bottom bracket. I mean, not by a lot, but it's extra faff, and it would be better without those spacers. So yeah, that was the first oddity. Not a massive problem by any stretch really, but once I got it installed and out on the road, another issue raised its head. The shifting was just dreadful. I thought I'd set up the cable tension and the limit screws properly before I went out, but I could only get into the big ring about half the time. Now, I didn't film when I was out, it was quite difficult, but I set it up in the kitchen. It went like this. So once I got back in from the ride, I started to fiddle around again with the limit screws and the cable tension, because I was aware this cage needed to move a little bit further outboard to help the chain catch onto the big ring. But I soon realized there was a really strange issue. So it seemed like the distance between where the big chainring sits and the back of the crank arm here, that distance seems to be really, really small. So let me give you some reference. So on this Shimano Tiagra crankset that I've got lying around, that distance is around 12 millimeters on my calipers. This Velo one that I discussed earlier, again, around 12 mil. This Racework one, the one with that crack in the pinch bolt, again, about 12 millimeters. This Machine crankset that I've had a while, a little over 10 millimeters. And this Z Race one that I need to review actually, yeah, just about 12 millimeters on there. However, on this fancy titanium crankset, that distance came out to just 6.51, maybe 7 millimeters at a push. Okay, so this is the issue I have. I have this front derailleur cage as far out as it can go. I'll show you. It's running extremely close to the crank arm there. I can move it out maybe another 1/3 of a millimeter along the entire length of it. It's so close to touching. But even with it this close, it still struggles to kind of catch and bring it up onto the big ring sometimes. And it is very much dependent, I found, on where I am on the cassette as well. If I'm a little bit further down, the chain line seems to be slightly more forgiving, so it'll catch a little bit more often than when I'm in the kind of top of the cassette here. Changing into the big ring is a little bit more difficult. The only way I found that I can make this shift reliably is actually to bring this out so far so that every time the crank arm rotates, it actually touches the front derailleur cage. In fact, if I show you, can you see that mark there on the crank arm? That's basically, yeah, where the front derailleur cage has been rubbing against it, and it makes a clicking noise every time the arm rotates. In fact, let me show you again. So I haven't touched these limit screws at all, and you can see this derailleur is running incredibly close. Let me show you what it's like to shift. Small ring, big ring, that was okay. Struggling there, it might catch. There we go, just about caught it. And this is the frustrating thing, because in order for it to shift reliably, this cage only needs to move out probably less than a millimeter, and then it would reliably shift every single time. So it's so close to working consistently, but yeah, this prevents it. And just to kind of cover all bases and show I'm not trying to catch this thing out with a peculiar situation, this is the gear on the cassette that I've been in the whole time, so 5th gear. It's not an unusual place where you'd want to change up into the large ring. Maybe if I was in the 1st or the 2nd gear, that might be a little bit more of an outlier, but yeah, this is a completely normal situation. The chain line is not in any way compromised, and it's still struggled to shift into the big ring quite consistently. I initially thought maybe I could put some shims in here where the chain ring mounts onto the crank arm, but that's not really ideal. And then once I started looking, I realized the face of this entire chainring was incredibly flat. So I took it off and compared it to some other one-piece chainrings that I had lying around. These are all virtually identical one-piece chainrings from AliExpress. The one on the left is from this titanium axle crankset, but you can see with them lying flat on my kitchen table, the chainring teeth all sit at slightly different levels. Now, I figured I only needed a tiny bit more clearance, so I decided to swap out the stock chainring with the one in the middle, which happens to be made by this brand Velo, actually. I figured it would give me about another 2 millimeters to play with. So I banged it on, set up the limit screws and sorted out the cable tension and went out for a ride almost instantly. The problem was completely solved. Shifting was absolutely flawless. Yeah, it didn't miss a beat. And hopefully you can see I still had a little bit of clearance to play with as well. Now, when I got back, I did actually record a little bit in the kitchen to show the shifting performance, but trust me, it is bang on. But like I said at the beginning, I shouldn't really have had to do this in the first place. I really wanted this thing to be good, and I would have normally put more miles on it before doing an episode. But yeah, just such a weird issue. I've never seen anything like it. I mean, it's lucky I had other chain rings to compare it to, really, or I just would have assumed this whole thing was trash. I assume it's not normal. Maybe some of you lot can go ahead and measure that distance on the cranksets you've got and put it in the comments, because I've tested the 9 or so cranksets that I've got access to, and this gap is just so much smaller than anything else. Bottom line, spacers and weird chainring aside, it is built to a pretty decent standard. The carbon crank arms are nice, the GXP mount on the back is well machined, and this retention bolt system seems pretty robust. So once I stop filming, I'll put this Velo chainring back on, and I'm gonna keep running it on the bike. I assume it's gonna last a decent amount of time, but yeah, I'll keep you posted. Now, luckily, it looks like you can just buy the crank arms for that thing on AliExpress, and because it's got that pretty ubiquitous GXP mount on there, you could pick that up and then maybe get yourself one of these Velo chain rings here. I think this thing cost me about 20 quid, so that is an option, considering it is nice and lightweight. Anyway, that about sums it up. So yeah, I think, see you next time. Ciao. God, it's chucking down out there. I was going to go for a bike ride, but I don't really fancy it. Anyway, yeah, see you next time. Ciao.
It's the bonus clip time.
Okay, 2 quick bits to throw on the end here, and forgive the mess and the washing. This is my kitchen, after all. So yeah, I've put the Velo chainring back on. I did notice though, when swapping chainrings out on this crankset, the bolts for the direct mount or GXP mount on the back there, they don't come with any Loctite pre-applied to the screws like they normally do. I've put a bit on, so that's something to be aware of if you pick up this crankset. Also, now I think about it, it's probably worth pointing out, I've had the front derailleur set to the correct height this whole time during testing, because if it's set too high, for example, that can adversely affect shifting. So yeah, I've not changed it at all. All I've been doing is changing the cable tension via these screws and then the high and low limit screws. And if I show you, yeah, that gap there, I measured it, it's about 1.7, 1.8 millimeters. So the spec, I believe, is between 1 and 3. So that's easily within spec. So that wouldn't have been the problem. I did also think maybe the contouring on this stamped sheet metal cage here might differ between group sets. So for example, if you run a Shimano or a SRAM one, it might be slightly more forgiving and be able to just about grab the chain and bring it onto the chain ring. But either way, this gap was just so much smaller than everything else with the stock chainring. Now the Velo one is on, I've actually remeasured it. It's 8.6 millimeters, that gap. So that's still a lot slimmer than all the other cranksets I tested, but either way, it was enough to get this functional again. But yeah, I took it out for another ride this afternoon. The shifting is spot on. So I have a feeling this crankset, yeah, is gonna stay on here for a little while actually. And secondly, a quick announcement, I suppose. So many of you will know I'm running these carbon ceramic disc rotors on this bike here, on the front and the back. I've had them on the bike maybe 4 or 5 months and I still really like them. But yeah, I did a giveaway on a previous video for 2 sets of these actually, and the giveaway is now closed. So I'll be picking 2 winners from like 2,000 odd entries, which is crazy. So yeah, I'll randomly select 2 winners and I'll get in touch via email in the next couple of days. So keep your eyes peeled. Maybe you'll get a set of these rotors in the post. Anyway, yeah, really appreciate it. And that's it. I'm gonna get a bite to eat, I think. So I'll see you next time. Ciao.